In today's episode, I'll be showing you how to set up player animations and also a working stackable inventory system with dragging and all capabilities for adding and removing inventory items as well. So here we are. It is time for part 2 of the Farming RPG tutorial series. I'm Major Dev. I devingly, and I do it devingly, I guess. I don't really know that saying yet. I just kind of randomly thunk it sometime, and now it is just kind of sticking with me. So, I loaded up the Farming RPG project here, and from the previous episode, we did our camera, collision, delta time, and the player. Now, there is one mistake I made in the lerp x to x2 by, and then the amount is how fast it's going to be moving. So we're going to do 0.3 and then multiplied by global.dt. And this will do the exact same formula that you saw before. Well, not exact same, but same concept. It'll do the same thing, same result. Now, if we delete that, and this is just going to lerp it. So what lerp does is it takes the point it is, and it goes by this amount to smoothly go to this amount. And there is some math behind it. You don't really have to worry about that. And the camera's working as it was before. It's a bit snappy, so I want it to be a little more slow. So we're going to change this to 0.1, so it moves slower. It's still pretty snappy and responsive. We're going to do 0.005 just to show you here what's happening. Yep, now if you see, it's moving very slow. So we're going to do 0.005 or 0.05, sorry. And this is the result I'm looking for. So now that we have that cleared up, we can get into the main part of the tutorial, which is the inventory system. So the first thing we need before we do the inventory is just some basic sprites that you want to represent the items. So I have a hoe here, 3 different kinds of seeds for wheat, tomatoes, and corn. And then I have the actual outcome of that. So wheat, tomato, and corn. And then the hoe as well will be an item. And then I also went ahead and added some player animations. How you go about doing this, you could either draw it in the engine and then add new sub-images here as an animation, and you need them in separate sprites. So this here's the idle down, which will look like this. Looks very fast, but don't worry too much about that. And then we also have run variants of each of these. And as for what you're seeing here with these boxes, this is what's called the collision mask. This is where your player will have collision. So if he were to, his head were to hit a collision, it wouldn't actually do anything. It would do it here, this top face, or top edge. So what you want to do with these animations is make sure you put the bounding box or collision mask in this sense, all in the same position for every single animation, same size and same coordinates. And then also set the origin of your sprite on all of these to be the bottom center. So if you look here, the origin point is always at the bottom center, which you can also hit this box here and just select bottom center, and that will automatically do that. Now that we have all that situated, we're also going to be setting up an animation thing so the player works with animations. So if I go here and don't mess this up for some reason, I'm clumsy. We're going to select the player idle down sprite. And what this will do in game is we'll run this animation constantly, but will not change it based on my movement. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here. Easy fix is image speed. So currently it's set to 1. 1 is going to run at its current rate. Now, if I wanted to run at a third, or roughly a third of the speed, I will do this. Now it will be a slower animation, more suited for my style. Now, we're going to completely ignore the animation stuff till we get the inventory all situated. So what we're going to do is create a new object and call this O inventory. And we're going to make a create event. And do not worry about the sprite because this will not hold any sprite at all. This will just be a system object or an object handler in a way that will just be running code but not be visual, if that makes sense. It will be faking the visuals of the inventory using draw calls, which we talked previously in part 1 about. It will pretty much just handle all of the visual effects. So, to create event, we need something called an array. So an array, think of it as a list of data. And I will kind of explain this here. So we're going to do this. These square brackets represent an array. Or you could do, if you want this, array create. This is how we will create an array, but this is holding things already in the array. So we're doing a slotted inventory, which means there's going to be different inventory slots. And I'm going to do something, make a variable for inventory width, and just say 5. Inventory height equals 3. So it's going to be a 5 horizontal, so 5 slots horizontally, 3 vertically. And what we're going to do here for the array create, it's asking for the size. We'll do inventory height multiplied by, inventory width multiplied by the inventory height. And then in the next part of this function, it's asking for a value. We're going to put -1. And -1 is going to be representing an empty slot. So what this will look like, it's going to look like this, but 15 times. That is what our inventory is going to look like in data. So it's a list of -1s. -1 representing each slot in this case. It might not make too much sense yet, but we don't necessarily need it to yet. Oops. I'm having some issues with this. There we are. Okay. So we've defined our width and height for our inventory and created the inventory array. That is the bare bones of the inventory itself. It exists. We can't do anything to it yet, but it is physically there. So now we're going to create an event called a draw event. And we're actually not going to do the normal draw. We're going to do a draw GUI. And what the GUI is, so think of, so there's layers, right? If a layer is behind another, it will be drawn behind. And the GUI layer is drawn on top of everything in the game. So this will always be on top, or what some people know as the HUD in some games. Now, we do need to calculate a couple different things here, just to get it to draw properly. So the issue of why we have to do this, and I'm going to call this GUI initialize in the create event. So the application versus the game, it's really just a surface, is actually a different size. So the GUI will be the size of the world, but we need it to be the size of the camera because we only want it to be visible on the camera. So what we have to do is GUI or display set GUI size, just like that. And the width is going to be ocamera.camWidth and ocamera.camHeight. This will set the display size of the camera to be equal to the GUI to be equal to the size of the camera. So now if we go into here, we're going to set a temporary variable, so center of screen. Way simpler than I was remembering. ocamera get dot cam width divided by 2. And then y diff is going to equal ocamera dot cam height divided by 2. And what this is going to do is take the coordinate position of the edge, the right side, and then divide it by 2, which will be centered on the x-axis. And on the height will be at the bottom, and then divided by 2, it'll be in the middle. So middle of x and y coordinates. So now that that is done, we're going to test this by doing a draw call. So I'm just going to put draw inventory here, and we're just going to do draw sprite s player up, for example, at x diff and y diff. You don't have to put this, I'm just kind of showing you what this does. And I completely forgot to throw it in my game. So yeah, make sure when you make a new thing, you put it in your game just anywhere. So now we see that this is constantly in the center of our camera, never shifting based on our window position, but solely based on, I mean, not our player position, but solely on our window position. Display the inventory. Now, we do need a couple inventory sprites here, which I completely forgot about. And I always like to add little groups in these folders, so it's creating folders inside of other folders. I right-click sprites, hit create group, creates this, and I can rename it by hitting F2, and then I could type the name. And then this lets me make sprites inside of this, organizing all my items, player animations, all that. So what I'm going to do is import a asset I have from my... The assets you will find online will be in this kind of formatting where you will have a lot of different stuff all in one area. And what we need is an inventory slot. So the best way I've found to get it off from this, if you go to image, convert to frames, and then this window pops up. You could zoom in by holding control and using your scroll wheel. Just select one of these things that you want. Move the width and height to match it, and we're only taking one frame, just like this. And we're gonna hit convert, just like that. Now we have our slot, and there's just a couple pixels I need to remove, just like that. And we're gonna rename this to S inventory slot. And we're actually going to remove this background just because it'll get a little bit in the way while doing this. So now that we have that sprite, we're going to go back to our inventory object, and we're going to go ahead and actually draw this sprite. So we first need to do what's called a for loop. A for loop has a little bit of complexity when you're trying to first understand it, but it's, for the most part, always written the same way. So since we need to figure out what's in this array, we're going to do for, not literally the number, but the word, and then in parentheses, var I equals 0. I. So var is standing for variable, which variable, again, is just anything you want it to be. It's a way of referencing whatever you input it as. So 0, so I is 0. So instead of saying 0, I say I. But since we're modifying 0, that's where it gets confusing, and I wouldn't necessarily try to understand a for loop at this point. It is beyond a lot of people's understanding. It just works, is what I'll say. So var I equals 0. I is less than array length, and then an open close parenthesis. We're going to do inventory. So inv is what I had it right here. And that is the array for the inventory. An array, again, is just a list of everything in our inventory. And we're going to do I++. So a quick understanding of what this is doing. It's first setting I to be 0. And if I is less than how many slots we have, it will add 1 to I. So I will equal 1, then 2, then 3. But only do it as many slots as we have, so 15 in this case. Because we're doing 5 by 3, 15. Now, in between this, if we were to say, like, if I equals 0, this will do whatever's inside of here when the slot is at 0, the first slot in our case. Because in arrays, the first slot is 0, or the first part of the list. Now, let's get into actually drawing the slots of the inventory. So we know that the xdiff and ydiff is the center of the screen, and xdiff doesn't mean anything and ydiff doesn't mean anything. It's just what we decide to call it. You guys are free to call it whatever you want as long as you reflect it where we actually use it in code. So we're just going to make a little bit of space, and we're going to find the coordinates of the starting slot. So we're going to say var xx. The reason I say xx is because x is a built-in variable and will modify the actual coordinates of the O inventory object. Now, xx equals xdiff. So we're taking the center of the screen, and then we're going to minus, let's say, 50. And now we're going to add, in parentheses, I mod, and then inventory width. And now we're going to multiply this by padding. And padding is in terms of how many pixels between each slot. So not between the edges, but between from center to center. We're going to say 22. And actually, that might be a little too small. We're going to put 24. Now, we're going to do the same thing with Y. And this minus 50 doesn't necessarily mean anything. It's going to be something we need to change. Except instead of doing mod on this one, we're going to do div, which is divide. And also by the width. It gets a little confusing there why we're doing width. And honestly, the best way to understand it is not understanding it. It should always technically be done that way if we're doing the mod and div. That's just the science behind it. I'm not going to question the math. It works. So now we're going to do draw sprite. And when you go about doing draw sprite, there's just draw sprite ext, and draw sprite stretched. I would personally only use sprite and ext, and on occasion stretched. But if we're just drawing the sprite, nothing changing, we'll do draw sprite. But in this case, we're going to do draw sprite ext in case we want to change it. So we're going to do s inventory. Oops. And what we're doing here is referencing the sprite s inventory slot, and it will turn red if it's an object or a number without a decimal is going to be an integer, or an object, I should say. Now, subimage 0, xx, yy, then 1, 1, 0, c white, and 1. Now, I'll explain these numbers here. XX is going to be the coordinates of each slot, which these will change based on what slot we're looking at. And this will add it based on this and that. It doesn't make too much sense yet. It will eventually. And then the X scale is going to be how big it is on the X axis. 1 is going to be the size of the sprite. 1 is going to be the size of the sprite for Y. 0 rotation. And then this color. This is self-explanatory with the color. This is just what would we want to add to the colors of the sprite. So if we just do C white, it'll draw it the way it's seen on the sprite. And then alpha, 1. Alpha is how translucent or transparent it is. Or if it's see-through or not. If 1, then it will be fully the way it's drawn here. Now, if we were to go ahead and run this, we will see a grid, which is showing 15 slots, 5 by 3. And it might not be to the right size you want. I would recommend just upscaling the actual sprite itself instead of doing it through code. It is, I would say, not worth the hassle. Now, we're going to make a little bit bigger. Actually, I'll do this as a good example here. We're going to make a sprite that is, let's say, 26 by 26. With the same colors and everything. We're going to do that. And this is just the artistic side of it. Kind of do what you want with that. And now if we run this again, it will look a little bit different. They will be overlapping on occasion. We're just going to modify this to be 27. Since we know it's 26 by 26, it'll have 1 pixel gaps between it now. I would say that is ideal for the inventory. And that is good. Now, we're actually going to add back this background now, because now that we're just going to do this. Why not match the color? But look, now we're seeing a grid with every single square individually, which will hold different items and quantities. And quantity is just meaning how many we have of that item. Now, we have to go into, so we have the inventory and it's empty, but it will always stay empty at this current state. So what we need to do is a way to add an item into our inventory and also remove. So we're going to go ahead and make a script right here. And we're going to name this script item information. And it's going to change it in here as well. We can go ahead and leave that. Now inside of this, we're going to hold the information of every single item that we want in our game. So I recommend doing a global variable due to referencing issues I've encountered without using global. We're going to do global.item corn. And we're going to make what's called a struct. A struct is a good way to say a group of data. So instead of an array that is a list of data or list of whatever you put in it, this is a group. So this will be one name, but we could reference anything that's put in here. A good example is if this was a person, right? And they have a name, they have a job, they have a address. It has all of that there. Now, we will actually use this name. So the item corn is going to be similar to a person, but in this case, it's an item. We're going to have the name be corn. We're going to have the sprite, which is referring to what image is drawn, S corn. And then a description. Actually, we're not going to do descriptions in this one. Just to keep it as simple as we can. We just need a basic inventory, but if you were to go about doing a description, or if you do want to do this in the future, you can always ask me. If you guys want a separate tutorial on a super detailed inventory system. Then we're going to do a, let's see, so name, sprite, then we need item type. And we can do whatever types we want. So let's say we want item types to be, we're going to do one for consumable, one for tool, crop, and seed. That's just the first ones that came to my mind on the top of my head. So corn would be a crop. And that is all we will put in this struct for now. Now we're just going to copy this a total of 7 times in my case. I lost count. Uh-oh. Okay, there we are. Now, we have corn, and then we need tomato, which this is going to be name tomato, S tomato for the sprite. So again, that's the image, and this is also a crop. Then we're going to go down to the next one and do the potato. I realize I didn't do a potato. I don't know where I'm pulling this from. Wheat. Sorry about that. Again, name is going to be the item you want. What name do you want the item to be? And S wheat, again, the image. And then that is also a crop. Now, this is going to be a little bit different. We're going to do the hoe. So it's going to be a tool for the item type. This is going to be called a hoe. S hoe. And then, yeah. So again, the item types, you can do whatever you want. You don't have to put these as long as you remember how you name it for all of these. That should work just fine. Now, we need to go about doing seeds. Sorry. I need corn seed. We're just going to add that to the name. And this is going to be a seed. We're going to add that for all those. Just do that. And in the same order, you don't have to. I just like to be organized with how I do mine. Tomato and wheat. And then make sure to go in and change the names. And that is how you make items. So every time you want to add a new item to your game, that just so it has all the information and exists, you make what's called a struct, and this is what you will be referencing as the item, but it will hold all this data within it. So they're very useful when going about storing large, intricate lists of data in a way, or groups of data. So when I say item corn, it's returning or giving me every single piece of data that's in here by saying item corn.name will give me the name. Item corn.sprite will give me the sprite. So we're going to make another script here. Is now we need to go about making the inventory functions. And what functions are is pretty much a way to make custom commands, or let's say like place meeting, for example, and it turns orange, is checking, X, Y, and object is what you have to put in. X representing the coordinates, Y representing the Y coordinate, and object representing what object do you want to check if we're touching. So place meeting just means touching, and that will return true or false. So if place meeting, so if true or if false, it will run the way it needs. So what we're doing, another way is going to be making ways to add to the inventory. So we're going to call this one inventory add. And this is something, if we want to add an item to the inventory, we say inventory add, and then whatever we want in here. And what we need here is inventory array. So again, array is the list of data, and this is asking what list are we trying to access or modify. And then a comma, and then the item, comma. Actually, let's just shorten this to inv add, and I'll make an easy way just to do adding multiple items, which it's not necessarily the best way of doing it, but it is very easy to understand. And it's not going to hurt performance much in any way, but it's a good understanding of what we're doing here. So if we were to type inventory add, inventory array, and item, it will run whatever is in here. So what we need to do now is, now that we know what inventory array that we specify, we have to say if array length inventory array is, actually we don't even have to do that because I realize we're doing a slotted inventory. My brain's all over the place here. So we have to first see the first empty slot, or if we already have that item. So we should first check if we have the item already. So we're going to do again a for loop. Var I equals 0, I is less than array length of inv array. And inv array is just what I'm calling this. You can call it whatever you want in this. I++. What this will do is loop through every single slot in the array and run this, whatever we put in here. So we're going to say if inventory array, and then in square brackets, I. So what I is doing is accessing the number of slot that we're checking. So it'll do inventory array 0, which is the first slot, then inventory array 1, which is the next slot, and so on through our entire inventory. Now, if it is not equal, so exclamation point equal sign is not equal to -1, and then curly braces. And so if it is not equal to -1, so meaning if it is not empty, let me just put a comment here. So we know that slot is not empty. Now, if we're trying to add it to see if the item already exists in the inventory, then we want to add it to the inventory, or add it to the pre-existing amount. So this might not make sense yet, but it will once we do this next part. So we're going to do if inventory array I, and then another square brace after dot 0 is equal to item. So when you do two equal signs, that's is equal. So if this is equal to item, in easy English terms, that's the way we can put it. Which there might be a whole nother way to explain that. That's just the way I understand it as. And this being a beginner tutorial and all, we should definitely keep it as simple as possible. So if it is equal to the item we are trying to add, so if the item is not equal to 0, I mean, if there's an item there and that item is the item we're trying to add, then we are going to do inventory array I 1 plus equals, actually better yet, plus plus. That will add 1 to whatever's in this slot. Now, this might not make any sense why I'm doing 0 and 1, because we're already accessing the slot, but each slot is going to have an array inside of that slot, a list of the ID and the quantity. So 1 is representing quantity, 0 is representing the item itself. And then after that, we're going to do return. What this does is it breaks this whole thing and stops running the rest of what's underneath it. So if we already have it and it adds to the quantity, we don't want to keep running and add a new stack, which is what we're going to do now. Add new stack, which you can go ahead and copy this here. It's going to be built about the exact same. And we're going to do the same thing, loop through the inventory array. And then if it is not equal, so this is where we're changing this. If it is equal to -1, so if it is empty, then we will do, completely get rid of that part, inventory array I equals item, comma, 1, because it's going to be the item ID or the struct that we're going to be putting in, which is these right here, and the quantity. Now, with this will put an array inside of the array, which I know gets pretty confusing with 2D arrays. And so there's normal arrays, which are just a single list, 2D arrays, which are lists of lists. And then there's little 3D arrays and so on. It gets confusing. 2D arrays are very, very useful when it comes to doing lightweight management of data. Now that we have all this in action, we can now add items to the inventory. Now, before we do anything else, I want to show you how to add multiple of an item. So I'm going to make another one called inventory add instead of inv add. This is going to be the one we actually call, which we're going to put in the inventory array, item, and quantity. And that's what that function will call. And we're going to do a repeat of quantity. And again, this is not best practice, but it will be effective to understand what we're doing. So it's going to repeat this. Since it's already doing all these checks, it's going to repeat it and add each quantity separately. And it'll add that item that many times. So it works for our case. Now, we're going to copy these two functions. We're going to call this inventory remove for both. Now, we're going to input that down here for the inv remove of these, and it will still do the exact same thing. Now, we're going to go through here for inventory remove, the main chunk of what we're actually doing. It's going to loop through. So if the item, in this case, exists. Sorry about that. So if the item is in our inventory, which that is the only thing we actually need, and if it's not empty and is our item, it will remove the 1. So instead of doing plus plus, do minus minus. That will remove 1 and return. And we're just going to repeat inventory remove based on those and the quantity. Now, that is the main chunk of our inventory system of adding and removing items. That is all we need. Now, if we go to our inventory here, and I go here, just before all of this here, add the item information inside of the O inventory create event. This will store the data for every item. Now, if I go to the bottom here and just type inventory add, it is now a built-in function. Well, not built-in, but the function we made. And how we add an item is do inventory, which is our array for our inventory. The item is going to be global dot, and it will pull up all the ones you made here. Item corn, quantity 5 or 4. And if I run this, you will see that nothing is showing, but I will guarantee you there is 4 of that item in this one slot. And how I know that is because my code is probably right, I hope. Now, how to get it to show the item in the slot is also not too hard. We're going to make a thing inside of this for loop under the draw inventory, draw GUI. We're going to do draw item in slot. Now, first, before we try to access a image that does not exist, we have to check if the slot even has anything. So if inventory I is not equal to -1. So if it's not empty, we will run what's in this. So I'm going to do var sprite equals, and now this is going to be a, what was I saying here? Yeah, so we're just going to store the sprite as this variable so we don't have to type out this entire thing every single time. So watch this. If we do inventory I, just like that, 0 representing the item ID, dot sprite. That will get the sprite of the item inside of this grouped data, which is a struct. So we're getting this right here. Now, it's not going to do anything yet. Then we just need to do draw sprite. And then sprite, which is what we named this here, which is this. 0 subimage. So the first frame of the animation, which most of them are not animations. X, X, Y, Y, same as where the slot is. and then semicolon. Now, we're going to go ahead and run this. And now we see that there is a bunch of items in our inventory. The reason behind this is unknown. Let's take a look here. If inventory I is not equal to -1. So I'm seeing here we're making this inventory and setting it to -1 and then running this once. Now it's going to be some issue with the inventory add function, which we are creating a new stack but then constantly doing it. So the reason why that was doing that, we forgot to put return, and same thing with item. Actually, we already have it there. Yep, that is everything, except we should probably put a return after these repeats, just so it does not keep trying to do something. Now, if we go ahead and run this, we're going to put 3 in the add item. Okay, now it shows we only have 1 slot of corn, which this is perfect because there's actually 3 corn in that 1 slot. And there's no way to visually see that yet, so we're going to actually do that now. So we're already drawing the sprite. Now we need to draw amount. So we don't want it to draw the amount if there's only 1, because there'd be no point to draw any text. Now if there's 2, I want to draw 2. So easiest way to do this, draw text. Or actually, before we do that, if inventory I 1, so again, that is the quantity of how much is in that slot, is not equal, or if it is greater than 1. So if we have more than 1 of that item, we will draw text. And what we're going to draw is at XX, YY, and then the string, which best way to describe a string is just text. So if I were to do quotations, hi, and run this, it will show hi, which it's kind of hard to see there. But it will draw text. So instead of doing quotations, we're just going to simply do inventory I 1, which we're going to draw the quantity out as a string, which a string is just how it's seen. Like text, a line of text, or a string, which is representing multiple lines or characters in text. So we do that, and now it shows a 3 for that item, which is perfectly lining up with how much we added. So if I add 104, which we probably won't see the full number here. Yep, but we kind of do. There's 104. We're going to add 4. Okay. So you can see that the text is a bit blurry. That is something that we're not really going to mess with right now. But what we are going to do is we're going to make it draw centered with that slot. So we're going to do draw set haline. So H align, FA center. And then after we draw the text, we're going to do FA left. So we're setting it, drawing the text, then setting it back every single frame. So now it is drawing it centered with the sprite. Now, if we don't want that text to be so big, we can do draw text underscore transformed. And we just have to pass in a couple more arguments, or put a few more arguments. X scale is going to be the horizontal scale. We're just going to do 0.5 and 0.5, which is half of what it was before, and angle is 0. And we are now going to run this again, and we are seeing a 4 right there. Now, if we wanted to draw on the corner of the sprite, like many games do, which we could do it from the left or the right, whichever you want, or even the top. We're going to do it at the bottom left in our case. Or actually, we're going to do the bottom right. We're going to be weird. The draw set haline FA center is not going to work. We want it to draw from the right. And what this will do, if we have a higher quantity, it will never exceed this. It will go this way, so it'll go that way into the sprite if we have a higher quantity. So a good way to show you, let me just get this. So we're going to do XX plus 5 plus 2. That'll get us closer towards the right. We're just going to do a little bit more. Let's do 3 and maybe 10. Yep, there we are. And actually, it's a little bit too far down now. Sorry about this. There we are. So it's drawing at the bottom right corner of the slot. So now let's say we wanted to do the amount plus, 10,000. And it will draw from the right side into that so we could still see it within the slot. So that is working as intended. And we are done with amounts. So we have the item and the amount being drawn. Now, the issue is we can add and remove items, and we have an inventory visual. It's just always visible now. So we want a way to turn off the inventory in a way so we don't see it. So then when we hit a button, it pulls up the inventory. So we're going to go to the create event of the inventory, and we're going to make a variable called inventory open. So inv open equals false. And this is just going to be a Boolean, which means it is a true or false. And we're going to go into and create a step event for the O inventory. And we're going to do if keyboard check pressed. So if we press whatever we put here, I'm going to do ORed. Again, this is using a key on your keyboard, like a letter or a number. So if ORed, and then in quotations, E, we're going to use E to open up the inventory. Now, since we're using a Boolean, which is a true or false, we could do this. Inv open equals not, again, exclamation point means not, inventory open. This is the easiest way to do that. Toggle between true and false. So if it's equal to true, will equal not true, which will automatically determine false. And if it's equal to false, it will equal true. Makes it super easy. Now, before we draw the inventory, I'm just going to indent all this to organize it. If inventory open. So if I just do if inventory open, it will do if inventory open is equal to true, which I will put here. This will do the exact same thing, but we have no need to actually define that because it's just easier to read like that. And just make sure you put your other curly bracket over here. So this all is within this check. So now if we run this, inventory will not be visible, but when we hit E, it will pull up the inventory. If I E again, it closes. So now, that is all good. We have a working inventory, and we just need a way to drag from one spot of the inventory to the other. So, in this case, if I want to move this corn over here, I would hold down my mouse and then release it there, and it would put it there. We need to make a system for that so it's interactable, and also you can hover over the inventory. So, if we go into the create event again, we need a couple more variables for this. We're going to make a little comment, drag vars. Vars is meaning variables, which is just a reference in a way, or what we want to name something, a value. So I'm going to do inventory from, so inv from equals 0, or sorry, undefined. Inv2 equals undefined. Slot from equals undefined. And then slot 2 equals undefined. These might not make any sense. So to put it easy in a way so anyone can understand, inventory from is from what inventory array, which in this case it's from this. But let's say we needed it to go to a chest. We can't say inventory to inventory because they are the same thing. So if we do inventory from O inventory dot inventory, or inventory 2 to O chest dot inventory, we could then reference and swap those from different arrays. So now if we do slot from, it's just from what slot, and slot 2 is to what slot. Easiest way to put it. And we are now going to make a way to drag. So we're going to do a function in the inventory function script. We're going to go down to the bottom, and we're going to do function start, or inventory start drag. And what this is going to do is initialize or start the drag. So we're going to do if inv from is not, if it is not equal to undefined. Sorry, if it is equal to undefined, then we're going to set inventory from to equal this inventory array, which we're going to pass into this function. And then also the slot. So we're going to say slot from equals slot. And all this is going to do is just store these variables if we don't already have any. Now we're going to make another function called inventory end drag. And this I get a little bit confused with sometimes. What we need here is the inventory array, and slot we are going to. Now we're going to say if inv from is not equal to undefined. So this is if we do not have anything. Actually, before we continue here, make sure to put a return at the end of this, and also a return at the end of this. Now, if we have, if this is not equal to undefined and we have something we're dragging, then we will run this code and do a swap. So we're going to just store some variables real quick. Temp from. So what are we coming from? So we're going to find the item and quantity we have in that current from. So we're going to say inventory from, and then in square brackets, slot from. That will be perfect. And then var temp 2 equals inventory 2 slot 2. So this is pretty much just going to store a temporary variable, so a variable that will be deleted from memory. That will, this is just a simple thing to store for this one frame. So I wouldn't worry too much about it, but do format it the way I do, or else it will, or it might give you a couple issues. So now we're going to say inventory from slot from equals temp 2, and we are going to copy that and do inventory from slot from, or sorry, other way around, inventory to slot 2 equals temp from, and then after we do that, we are going to set all these back to undefined. Now, I did realize that we forgot to actually set these values here. So what we're going to do is we're going to do inventory 2 equals inventory array, and slot 2 equals slot on this end drag. And we're just going to put a comment here called reset vars, vars meaning variables, and variables are these. Now, we need a way to visually see that we're dragging an item now. So we're going to do function show item drag. which you can call these whatever you want. I'm just choosing to do something very straightforward and English, oriented. Now, we don't actually need to put anything within these because this is just information we need to reference. But if it's not from itself, it will be, not too modular in this case, meaning it will be hard to work with other objects. And it will kind of only work locally, which means within itself. So, now with the show item drag, we're going to do draw sprite. And this is just going to be the super simple way of doing this. And actually, before we do that, we're going to do var. Oh, sorry. Delete all that. I'm completely lost here. So if inventory is not equal to undefined. So if we are dragging from an inventory, that means it should have a sprite. So var sprite, like we did earlier, equals inventory from slot from 0.sprite. So again, 0 is going to be referencing the item ID, and .sprite is from the group of data here, .sprite, for whatever image it may need. And then we're going to do draw sprite, subimage 0. Now, for the coordinates, this is where we need to draw it to the mouse position. And what you can do here, mouse underscore X, mouse underscore Y. Now, if we were to just run the game, nothing will happen because we have not used these functions at all. So, first thing we want to do is go to the draw GUI event of the O inventory. And after all of this inventory open, but not outside of this, we're going to do show drag, which is show item drag, and you do not have to put anything in these parentheses. Now, inside of this inventory slot thing, we're going to make a system so it shows what we're hovering over. So, in sprites, you do need a hover sprite. So, this is what my slot looks like. I'm just going to make a white selection, and I'm actually just going to do that as well, and then just delete that. So this holds the same size and everything as this, but we'll just draw this over top of the sprite. So go back into here, and after it checks all this data and stuff, we're going to do draw hover. So if we need to see if the coordinates of the mouse are within the coordinates of the slot. Now the easy way to do this, if point in rectangle, which is a built-in function, which takes point X, point Y, and then 4 coordinates from the box we want to check if those coordinates are within. So we want to check mouse X, mouse Y, and this will pretty much check if our coordinates are within a certain amount. Actually, I'm doing this incorrectly. We can't do mouse X and mouse Y in this case. We have to do device underscore mouse X to GUI, and then just put device 0. The reason why this is because the GUI layer and the actual game layer are, again, different in coordinates. So we can't input mouse X and mouse Y because on the GUI layer it will not return the same thing. And now we want to do for the rectangle XX minus, and I'm just going to hard code this. So it's 26 by 26. So if we take half of that, it'll be 13. So if we go back here, XX minus 13, YY minus 13, and then another XX plus 13, and then YY plus 13. And that is the coordinates we need, which depending on your size, you just take the half and minus, minus, plus, plus. Because we're drawing it from this middle point, so minus 13 plus 13, which is here. Or minus 13 here. and then from plus 13 to here. So it'll draw this rectangle here, or square in our case. Now, if it is within that, we're just going to do draw sprite, S inventory hover 0 x x y y, which is where the slot is being drawn. So now just test this real quick. It will show us hovering over each of these sprites, but we still cannot drag. So we do have to fix that solution now. So while we are hovering, this is perfect. Now here's the thing, if mouse check button pressed. So it's checking if we press a button on the mouse and we define what button we are pressing, which is going to be MB, standing for mouse button left. So if we click our mouse once, it will do drag inventory start drag of inventory, because we're modifying inside of our player's inventory. Again, we have it right here, which is holding all the items. And then slot, which is going to be I, because in this for loop, it's looping through all of the slots and checking this information. Now, we just end that. So we're going to put a little comment here so we know what we're talking about. Start item drag. And now we can also just copy that again. End item drag. So now if mouse checked button, instead of pressed, do released. So if we release our mouse button and we're still hovering over a slot, it will do end drag. And it will input the exact same things as we did previously. Now this should work. Just double check here. Yep, we are dragging everything perfectly. And it is, moving. So right here, I click and then release, click, release, click, release. But now if you click an empty slot, it will break. So a fix to that is if you go to inventory start drag. Actually, better yet. Actually, no, it's probably better to do it in here. So inventory from is equal to undefined. And if slot, or inventory, you can't put an if inside of an if, and inventory slot is not equal to -1. Obviously we can't drag something that doesn't exist. So now if we try to click that, it will not crash our game, but will still work, ultimately swapping it with empty slots. And I'm just going to show you an example here of swapping items. We're just going to add another one of those items we had earlier, like the tomato. We're going to add 76 of those, I guess. And now if you open it, we have 76 tomatoes and 4 corn. If we swap them, they should swap perfect. Same with like that. But we are seeing one issue where it's not actually drawing the sprite of when we drag it. So that is a big issue. It's probably the way here it is. We're drawing to mouse X and mouse Y. Like I said before, we have to do device, get our device mouse X to GUI, device is 0, and same thing with the Y coordinates. Now if we just run that again, we will now have no issues seeing the item we are dragging. And it won't show the quantity, but that is okay, honestly. It's a very basic inventory system with adding, removing, and displaying everything we need. Now, if you're worried about where it draws the inventory and everything, you can go about changing that by this 50 value that I had set before. Let's say I do this at minus 150. Like this, it will draw it to the left, right here. Which honestly is not a terrible place for this inventory. Let's just do minus 200 and we're going to do 0, and we're going to change the height to be, for example, let's do a width of 3, height of 5. So it's inverting it, and it's going to look like this, which is not a terrible area to put this inventory. But I might put it more at the top here, just so it's more out of our way. So let's do minus 60. And a lot of this is trial and error, but here's minus 60, which is in a perfect position of kind of what I want to go for. So there is that there. And now, as for the look of the game, it looks pretty barren, but we have a working inventory and dragging, displaying everything we need. I am rambling way too much. So we're going to move on to the next part of this tutorial, being the player animations. And I'm terribly sorry, we're already an hour in to recording this, and we still haven't gotten that much done. But that's okay. The inventory, this is the bare bones of the entire system here, and we will not need to change this much. And it's fairly simple written. I tried to organize as much as I can. A lot of it might not make sense to you now, but the more you do programming, the more you try to make these inventory systems and look into arrays, structs, all of this stuff, everything will start to slowly piece itself together and will make perfect sense to you someday, as long as you stick with it and really try to, make everything you really dream for. So we're going to make a player animation handler. And what this means is when we move left, we want it to play the side animation for running. But to the left, we'd mirror it, so it'd be facing to the left. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually make a script, since we already learned how to do functions, and also to get more organization. I'm going to make a function called player functions, a script, sorry. And we're going to rename this to player animations. And this is, in a way, functions are a chain of functions. So it's a custom way to reference multiple things, or like a chain of events that you want to happen to just make your life so much easier. So in this, just like we did with the inventory, if we didn't want to do it this way, we'd have to write this out every single time if we wanted to add an item. Instead, we put it in one line. Super easy and makes our life so much better. Now, player animations. And we need to input our H or we'll just do H velocity and Y velocity, because we are not able to reference those outside of the player. So if we go here and we do animations, so step event of the player, player animations, and we are going to input our HVEL and YVEL, or VVEL in our sense. Sorry about that. I'm actually going to change that in the thing here. VVEL. Now, first we want to check. Sorry, I completely forgot. We need to make a new variable in our create event called direction. So dir, I would not put actual direction because it will not work, because that's a built-in variable. We're going to put 0. 0 representing up, left, right, whatever you want. I'm going to make it represent up because 0, 1 will be right, 2 will be down, 3 will be left. Whatever you choose to do, it is fine with me. So determine direction. And this, we're back in the player functions, player animations function here. So if HVEL is greater than 0, And we're going to do this on one line just to make it nice and organized. So if h velocity is greater than 0, meaning we're moving to the right, dir equals 1. I'm just going to copy that. Now if hvel is less than 0, direction equals 3, like we were saying before. Now vvel is greater than 0, it will equal 2, because positive on the vertical is actually down. And then this will be less than 0, meaning we're going up, meaning 0. Might not make sense, but if you copy this exact, it will hopefully make sense to you sometime the more we go into this. Now, we're going to make an idle animation. So if hvel is equal to 0 and vvel is equal to 0, meaning if we are not moving, so I'm going to put a comment there, not moving, then we need to first determine, because I have 3 different idle animations for directions, just like that. So if we go to this again, we need to remember that we have direction, meaning the last direction we were facing. So we're going to do something called a switch statement. And it's formatted just like this. Let me just make some space so you can see. So it's showing red right now because we need to put something in here. But switch is pretty much saying if this or this or this. So we're going to switch the direction. And the reason why we're doing that, we could do case 1 or 0 and then break. And this is how it is always formatted. And you want to do this 4 times, but change this to 1, 2, and 3. So now this might make a little more sense to you seeing it like this. So if we're not moving and if direction is equal to 0, we will do this. And if it's equal to 1, we'll do this. If it's equal to 2, we'll do this. And equal to 3, we'll do this. And so on. So we're going to say sprite index, which is setting the sprite of the object to be whatever we want it to. So if we're 0, if direction is 0, that means we're facing up in my case. So I'm going to do s player idle up. And then I'm also going to throw in image x scale equals 1. So this is the x size of the player, and we're just setting it equal to 1. You will see here in just one moment. So I'm going to put this in all of those, except in case 1 is going to be facing to the right. So the thing we change here is player idle side, because in my animation, he is facing to the right. So it's equal to 1. Now, if he's equal to 3, which means he's facing left, that is where it'll be -1, but the same animation. Now, in case 2, we have s player idle down. And that will ultimately determine our last direction facing. So if I were to run this, and I were to do this and then stop moving, he will be idling to that direction, but obviously he will not change until I stop moving. Just like that. And he will be facing different directions. But now we need to do the moving. So now where this ends here, we're going to put an else. So this is if is moving. So if we're not moving, that means we're moving. That's a weird way to put it, but that is it. And we're going to copy this switch statement and just throw it right in here. The only things we have to change is the sprite index. So we just have to say, instead of idle up, we're going to do run up, or whatever you named yours. Just like that. Now, if we go ahead and run this again, he will now be animated when moving. And it's a bit slow, as you can see here. So if we go back to the player and we change this image speed to be 0.5, it'll be a slightly faster, just like that. And now if you'd not like the animation speeds being consistent like this, all being the same speed, you can go to the animation itself and go to this FPS thing and change it from here, which this will always show it at the speed of 1 for image speed. So if we just go through here and modify all these. And now everything will be slightly slower. But I don't want to necessarily do it with my running animation. So I'm going to go back and change those to 30. Now if I go and look, my idle will be slow, my run will be fast. Idle slow, run fast. And that just goes and sets up my entire system for animations. Now, that will be the end of this tutorial here. We now have access to adding items to an inventory, removing them, dragging them, and swapping them. And we also have an animation setup for your player. So now, part 3 will be ready very soon. I'll be trying to pump out the series as fast as I can and answering any questions you guys have in the comments. Actually, not goodbye. The next episode, we're going to be covering planting and harvesting and just in general, the next part of the farming system. So stay tuned for that. Peace. I probably don't